So I'm calling this talk November 2024. And I teach on Thursday nights as well. So I worked on this on Thursday. And of course, the only thing on my mind, I can't say the only thing on my mind because I thought about feeding the cats and what to eat and things like that. But primarily it was all about the election. And I don't know about you, but I had an avalanche, it felt like, of emails in my of what's going on, what to do, this, and I saved them all, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read all of those, and after I think about 6 or 7 hours, I didn't look at any of them. I said I was gonna save them, and I just deleted them all. It's like this is like so much information, so much. This is what happened. That's what happened. I didn't watch any of the returns. I didn't do anything. I watched British murder mysteries all of Tuesday evening. Midsummer Murders is our favorite, and and didn't need to. And I looked on Wednesday morning at my phone, and it was as I thought it would. The result was as I was thought it would be, and I was pretty numb. But all the stuff started flying immediately, and it's so easy to get sucked in. And a few days earlier, I was looking through some notes from a training I took a few years ago, and something popped out at me that really resonated. It was it's from uh, it was a quote from the book Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And she quoted Angel Kyoto Williams, who is a wonderful Zen teacher who is one of the co-authors of Radical Dharma, which is a great book. And Angel Kyoto Williams said, our access to the global scale of suffering has become immediate through technology, but we have not yet developed the capacity to be with that increased awareness of suffering. And I think it's the same with information. We have this inundation of information, of all kinds of information, one piece that corroborates the next piece, or that they're different, and it feels like, oh, I have to read it all, I have to be well informed, and it's just impossible. Our nervous systems can't handle it. And it's not just with the election, it's with everything else we've been holding these past few years. I have pages, I have these are like Dharma talks going back to 2013 on this particular area of what I would talk about. And it goes back to being present for the pain and discomfort. And what I was reminded of is this quote from Dorothy Parker, which is, what fresh hell is this? It seems like that's like happening all the time. And it's like being present for the reality of who we are as a country. This systemic brutalization of indigenous people, of Black and brown bodies, of people who we deem expendable, marginalized, unnecessary, LGBTQ plus, waves of immigrants. It's just kind of unending, and that reality, and seeing that happening over and over again. And it can be a lot. And that what comes up also for me when we're holding all this, and all this inundation of suffering, inundation of information, inundation of all these things, inundation of our emotions, is the rest of the piece that Adrienne Marie Brown said in this quote from her book. And she said, this is where meditation comes in. We choose where our attention goes. We choose to be with emotions intentionally and listen for what is needed. The more we listen, the more we understand. The more we see the interconnectedness of the world, my place in it, and my insignificance, and my wholeness, and our collective beauty and potential. And so that is that gift of this practice, is this intentionality where we do have this, we can feel overwhelmed, we can feel inundated, but we also have the capacity thankfully, I'm so grateful for my practice this week to have an intentionality of, you know what, I'm going to take a step back. I know how to take care of myself. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about how we resource ourselves in these moments, how we take care of our nervous system and taking a step back, um, being present, opening towards the emotions that are here, but just letting them be, not thinking we have to do anything about it. And where I am right now is taking care of my heart. I saw a quote, your heart is the softest place on earth. Take care of it. That is from a poet, Naira Wahid. Um, and it's really important that we take care of ourselves, that resourcing. So this is my experience this week. I'm sure it's the experience of many of you this week. I've been in connection and community with a lot of folks, and we're all kind of going through it in the same type of way. And then this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me, I saw an article by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a Theravadan monk. He's a very wise man. He's a scholar. He's a linguist. He's translated the Pali Canon. So if you have any of the suttas, you're probably reading a translation of his. He also is very active in social justice and um, uh, what's going on in the world. He was in Thailand for many, many, many years, and then he came back a number of years ago, and he said, why are you just sitting in on your cushions, not doing anything? And he started an organization, a nonprofit called Buddhist Global Relief, and he's very outspoken, and he's a New Yorker, which endears me to him. But he's very wise, and he wrote this article. He just wrote this article apparently this week, and it was published in Lion's Roar, which is one of the main Buddhist publications. It probably was published online, lionsroar.com or .org. And he said he titled it Back to Square One, but they changed the title to It's No Time to Be Neutral. And he talked about 4 steps that we can take at this moment, or at some point. And the first one he talked about, he said, the first step is a matter of internal hygiene. And that's exactly what I was talking about in the Adrienne Maree Brown quote. It's simply to pause, to sit down, to process what we're going through. And this is where the Dharma provides those tools that lets us be in the moment, lets us hold our emotions, hold our experiences instead of being swallowed up in what he calls the emotional whirlpool. We can turn our mindfulness to the breath and to our bodies and observe the ripples of the emotional agitations, which is what we're doing. And not just when we're practicing, not just when we're sitting, but as we go through the day. Because as I always say, we don't just practice to get good at meditation. We practice so we can have this continuity of mindfulness as we move through the day, as we move through the world. And the second thing he talked about is the cultivation of the heart. And I was talking about taking care of our hearts because it's the softest organ in the body. But I also like to talk about the undefended heart, where we don't armor it. We're actually open. We open our hearts to our own emotions, to the anger, resentment, frustration, bewilderment, angst, whatever it is coming up for us. Just as we open our hearts to joy and happiness and pleasant things. Um, he talked about the cultivation of the heart. He said, once the mind settles down, and there's no timeline for this. This is the beauty of this. There's no timeline for this. Once the mind settles down, we expand our hearts to embrace in loving kindness and compassion all those at great risk right now. There's so many people at risk under this next administration. Women, young girls, immigrants, documented and undocumented, Muslims and Jews. I mean, there's the Islamophobia and the anti-Semitism that's happening, because white nationalists are incredibly anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant, and so everybody falls under the bus. And so to open our hearts to those, not shut them down. There's folks on this call who have been impacted by climate destabilization. Uh, it's everywhere, and to really not shut our hearts down, to take care of ourselves, but to be willing to be present. It's that bodhisattva invitation of the bodhisattva, to recognize that we work for the liberation of all beings, not just the people in our immediate vicinity, not just for ourselves. And he talks about the third step in moving through these next weeks and months and years is, once we establish love and compassion as the guardians of the heart, is to act, to find opportunities to express our moral conviction in action, whatever that is. Doesn't have to look a particular way. We show up in ways that make sense for us. Where you are, doing what you can with the time you have, and I'm involved with a nonprofit that works with labor organizations and works with immigration, with immigrants. And so there's a lot of activity. There's been a lot of activity, and there will be more activity. So that's kind of where I'm working, and I have been working for a few years. And he says, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to do the work of love, to do the bodhisattva work. And he says, just as Guan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, right here, that Guan Yin in her pose of royal ease, which I just absolutely love that pose. But she's at ease, but ready to hear the cries of the world and jump in to help. Just as Guan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, strives to liberate sentient beings, even though beings are numberless, so in our own little way, we must continue seeking the good of all, even when the obstacles seem insurmountable. So that's the invitation. And then he said the fourth step is to more than, just do more than just resist these regressive trends. We should use discernment and reflection to understand how we got here, because we have to understand the story. We have to understand, we have to, read people, historians, anthropologists, political scientists, economists. We have to know the history of this. And I've been reading over the last many, many, many years a lot of the history of our country, and how white became a thing, because the white race really didn't exist as a thing until about 400 years ago, the 1600s, when it became expedient for the people who had brought slaves to this country and said, it makes sense that, there needed to be a distinction, and then there began this great othering. And so that type of thing, we have to understand the underpinnings of this, and begin to strategize. And so I really cherish Bhikkhu Bodhi, and I really cherish what he talks about, and he always brings in the dharmic piece of it, which is probably why it really resonates with me so much. But I've also, when he talks about reading and learning, I've read many, many, many people over the years, and I've listened to many people over the years, and they have expressed great wisdom. And in fact, I was in a Zoom group the other night with a woman, Austin Channing Brown, who's an author. She wrote a book called Still Here. She's really good. And she was talking about Nikole Hannah-Jones, who did the 1619 Project, who wrote a piece and said, we're only 60 years into a multiracial democracy in this country. And as Austin was saying, we're only this close. We're only 60 years away from Jim Crow. She's a Black woman and her parents were not able to vote. So it's not that long ago that this stuff happened. So it didn't just disappear. Racism didn't disappear with segregation, integration. It didn't disappear when Obama was elected. That's what people like to say, and if Kamala Harris had been elected, misogyny would have disappeared and patriarchy would have disappeared. And it's like it goes underground, and now it's experiencing a resurgence. But these wise people have talked about John Lewis, who was a congressman from Georgia, and he was very involved in the civil rights movement. He was the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and was involved with many, many things in the 60s. And he said, ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. And the Reverend Jim Lawson, who was also very involved in the civil rights movement, he actually was a student of Gandhi's and taught nonviolence. He was the one who trained the people before they sat down at the lunch counters in nonviolence. And he said a system that was developed over 300 or 400 years will not be dismantled in a few decades. It takes a steady stream of work. So we are in the middle of that. We are in the middle of that right now, this work that we have to do. It's not, we don't just, I think human nature is we want to get it and then be done. But that's not what's happening. That's not where we are. That's not the work that needs to be done. It's a continuing of this work, and there's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And I wish I had written it down. I have it written somewhere, but there's a quote from the Talmud that says, even though, and I'm paraphrasing, even though we know we won't finish the work in our lifetime, that doesn't mean we're not required to do the work. Even though we know the job will not be done in our lifetime, it doesn't release us from our obligation to work for the benefit of all beings. That is the core, such a core principle of Buddhism, of the Buddhist teachings, of this non-harming, this not intentionally taking a life, not causing harm, and not just that, but to cultivate compassion, cultivate kindness, work to end injustice, work to end greed, hatred, and delusion where we see it as best we can. We don't have to be heroes. We don't have to be out there on the front lines, but how do we show up in this moment? And there's a quote I think I got it from Radical Dharma, a quote from Angel Kyoto Williams, which I have, I think, on the front page of my website, my homepage. It says, what is required is a new Dharma, a radical Dharma that deconstructs rather than amplifies the systems of suffering, that starves rather than fertilizes the soil that deep roots of societal suffering grows in. A new Dharma is one that not only insists we investigate the unsatisfactoriness of our own minds, but also prepares us for the discomfort of confronting the obscurations of the society we are individual expressions of. It recognizes that the delusions of systemic oppression are not solely the domain of the individual. By design, they are seated within and reinforced by society. So it's not just enough to sit on our cushions and get free. It's a matter of seeing the bigger picture, of working to, the bodhisattva, working to end suffering, working to liberate beings, even though they're numberless, even though suffering is endless. We work to end that. So this bodhisattva ideal and the work that's in front of us right now, it's right there. It's right there. They're so intertwined. They walk hand in hand. And so many, that's been a problem where it's like Buddhism can be a very individual practice, and it is because we're working with our mind, but we don't just do it. It's like that was Thich Nhat Hanh, he's the monk in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. He said, I can sit on my cushion or I can get up and do something. And we all know this tremendous impact that he's had in the world. He's tremendous. And so that is what really gives me hope and keeps me going these days. And Austin Channing Brown the other day, she was talking about hope and people who feel very hopeless. And she goes, what else you got? Are you just going to acquiesce if you don't have hope? What else is there? There is other things, but to move forward, I think it's really something to look for and find ways to do it. And being in community is really important. I've been in a lot of connection with a lot of people. In fact, I had a really long conversation today as I was driving somewhere with a friend of mine that I went to high school with, that I haven't talked to in a year, but I know we're really aligned, and we just like that for 45 minutes, and it was great. It's really great to normalize in those ways, and at least that's what works for me. So thank you so much, my friends, for being here. It's a challenging moment right now, as many moments have been over the last several years, but I also, final thing is like, don't miss the joy, because it also is still right here. It's absolutely right here. Whatever the joy is, don't push it aside and say, how can I feel happy when this is going on? It's like, be present for the moment, whatever the moment is. If there's joy in the moment, be present for the joy in the moment. So, and Austin has had a sign on her wall, joy is resistance. So joy is an act of resistance. So with that, I leave you, my friends, and I say thank you again, as always, for your very generous and kind attention. And I hope this has been of some benefit.